mean, rational states don't go in for use of nuclear weapons at the drop of a hat. No other nuclear weapon state has faced this kind of a predicament where we have two nuclear-armed adversaries on our borders who themselves share a nuclear and missile proliferation relationship. The whole idea of Pakistan's nuclear weapons was to stop a conventional conflict with India while they could continue with terrorism. India, having understood that, has been able to craft new ways of using force, as I mentioned to you, with surgical strikes and airstrikes. In the garb of providing this kind of a technology and material to Pakistan, what else is China providing that we don't know? The thing is that Pakistan has not been publicly chastised. So the centrifuges that are found in Iran, which became the source of suspicion of their nuclear weapons ambitions, were from Pakistan. That's a part of the geopolitical situation where China has put a spanner in the wheels for India, because they've taken a very legalistic position to say that India is not a member of the NPT and therefore you cannot become a member of the NSG.
Hello and welcome to Dev Talks. Today, in this special episode, talking about nuclear deterrence and security issues. You know, India is one of the only few countries in the world which has two nuclear adversaries on both sides of its shoulder. To discuss the nuclear security issues that India faces, I have with me Dr. Manpreet Sethi, who's a distinguished fellow at the Center for Air Power Studies, New Delhi, where she leads the project on nuclear security. Over the last 18 odd years, she's been researching and writing on subjects related to nuclear energy, strategy, non-proliferation, disarmament, arms export, and controls. She has authored and published over 80 papers on this subject, along with 8 books on worldwide nuclear issues. Dr. Sethi regularly lectures at leading establishments for the Indian Armed Forces, the police, and Indian Foreign Services. She's also the recipient of the K. Subramaniam Award, a national honor given to her for her excellence in strategic and security affairs. Thank you, ma'am, for joining me this afternoon to have this discussion.
Thank you so much, Adi. It was such a pleasure to be here.
Actually, it's likewise. Ma'am, as I said, India is the only nation in the world, with two nuclear-armed adversaries on either side of its border. It doesn't help one of them is Pakistan. No, and when I say Pakistan, I think it forms an opinion in everybody's mind. It is a very peculiar situation, and it gets further enhanced when you see both these countries collaborating with each other and bringing about a certain kind of jointness in their approach towards India. Do you see this as a status of deterrence against India, or is it a constant nuclear standoff?
Thanks, Adi. That's a great question to start this conversation with, because you've drawn our attention to the rather complex situation that India faces, in terms of security. So I would not call it a situation of constant nuclear standoff. But having said that, it is not as simple as a matter of this or that. India's challenge is so unique in terms of the nuclear dimensions that it faces from both Pakistan and China. No other nuclear weapon state has faced this kind of a predicament where we have two nuclear-armed adversaries on our borders who themselves share a nuclear and missile proliferation relationship, and one of which uses the terrorism as part of its state policy against another nuclear-armed state. Nowhere in the world have we seen, an equation like this. Now, India's nuclear weapons are meant to deter the possibility of nuclear blackmail or coercion, given that we have territorial disputes with these two countries, where both of them are claiming large tracts of our own territory. So given these disputes, if they were to have nuclear weapons, and we did not, it would put us in a situation of a dangerous asymmetry. And therefore, the decision by India to test its nuclear weapons in 1998, before a treaty like the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, the CTBT, would come into play, which would close our option of testing in the future. So therefore, India tested in order to establish nuclear deterrence with both Pakistan and China, so that there would not be a possibility of a territorial status quo being changed through nuclear blackmail or coercion by any of these two neighbors. Now, nuclear weapons, while they establish nuclear deterrence, which is to stop the adversary from using nuclear weapons against us, unfortunately, this weapon cannot deter the use of terrorism by Pakistan, and nor can it deter, line of actual control incursions by China, because the border is not demarcated over a large part of the territory. So, the nature of destruction that a weapon of mass destruction, which is a nuclear weapon, the kind of destruction that it can cause makes it unusable for many other contingencies other than nuclear weapons use. And therefore, for terrorism, for LAC incursions, we have to find other ways of looking at those challenges and of addressing those challenges. And India has, as you know, looked at what we call the DIME spectrum: diplomatic, information, military, and economic. We've looked for our areas of how to deal with these problems at the diplomatic level, at the information level, through narrative building, through economic sanctions and other actions taken in the economic front, getting the international community to take actions against such kind of measures. In the case of Pakistan, for instance, with the UN, taking certain sanctions, putting sanctions. In the case of the Financial Action Task Force, the FATF, which takes actions against Pakistan for its continued use of terrorism. So all of these fall within that spectrum. And within that, the military component or the military answer to this problem has also been found in doing some kinds of acts that would not get you to use nuclear weapons.
Okay.
What is important is your conventional use of force should be in a manner that the adversary doesn't want to use nuclear weapons in response. So you're making his nuclear weapons redundant, because that's what our strategy is, that nuclear weapons are only for nuclear weapons deterrence. So you have to fight your conventional battle at the conventional level. And India, in the form of surgical strikes in 2016, airstrikes at Balakot in 2019, tried to find these answers in military use of military force in all of this. Essentially, my long answer to your question is that conventional and nuclear deterrence have to be maintained with both Pakistan and China because of the complex challenge that they pose to us, which is not coming to you with the same at the same level at which nuclear weapons are. So your nuclear weapons are for nuclear deterrence, but they are posing challenges which are either below which are below that particular threshold, and therefore they have to be met at that threshold. So that's how I would say it's not essentially just deterrence or standoff. It's somewhere in the middle, and you're having to deal with this complexity the way it exists.
That's a very interesting answer that you've given, ma'am. And you're talking about basically making their strength redundant, which is what I think most of the analysts talk about Pakistan, leaving China aside for a moment, is that, how can we make their nuclear weapons redundant, something that they shine in our face most of the time. And the low intensity combat sort of a scenario that you've mentioned, where you're trying to find a balance between a full scale battle rather than just a targeted attacks and stuff like that, ma'am. But every time this low intensity combat sort of a scenario has been put across to our adversaries, especially in Pakistan, of course, China is smart enough not to bring about this nuclear question. And I'm sorry, the question may be a little long. If you notice, during this entire Galwan standoff and everything, the Ladakh standoff, China not once, not even his mouthpiece, has said anything nuclear. Whereas that's not the case with the Pakistanis. When you mentioned that India is trying to find that balance between the all-out and low intensity sort of a thing, how do you think the other side takes it?
So the other side is obviously very worried, because the whole idea of Pakistan's nuclear weapons was to stop a conventional conflict with India while they could continue with terrorism. So nuclear weapons became a shield for continuing with provocations, for bleeding India through 1,000 cuts. So that continued to remain the policy, but they got the added protection of nuclear weapons by raising this whole threat about any conventional action from India would lead you to the nuclear level.
Straight.
So by projecting that threat of escalation as being an automatic threat, the moment India would do something conventional, nuclear weapons will come into play. So not only were they deterring India from using its conventional capability, but at the same time they were magnifying this risk for the international community, in the hope that the rest of the world will come to constrain India, to tell them that it's not worth going down this path because it's too risky. So you are the responsible, mature, nuclear power. You don't get provoked, even if the provocations are coming from the other side. So that's the manner in which they have framed it. And when India has shown that we are able to use conventional force despite the presence of nuclear weapons and making them redundant, then the fear on the other side is the purpose for which we acquired nuclear weapons was to close this window of the use of conventional force. But India is showing that we can still use conventional force. Then the role of the weapon for them begins to, get diluted. So, for India, what is important is to signal this space exists for conventional war and that we can fight that conventional war differently. This year we are also commemorating 50 years of 1971, the breakup of Pakistan. That kind of a war is not possible in today's environment. So, nuclear weapons do put a constraint on the kind of use of conventional force you can do. And India, having understood that, has been able to craft new ways of using force, as I mentioned to you, with surgical strikes and airstrikes. So that doesn't cause a threat to the state survival. And therefore, the chances of Pakistan wanting to use nuclear weapons is reduced. So the space for conventional war exists. And that's what India has been maintaining, that we can credibly fight a conventional war despite the presence of nuclear weapons. And this then causes concern to the other side, which is why they have started talking about, as you know, the idea of tactical nuclear weapons, or the concept that our threshold is very low. But what we have seen from our experience is that the threshold is not really so low, because, I mean, rational states don't go in for use of nuclear weapons at the drop of a hat. These are weapons meant only for some particular contingencies, and Pakistan also well realizes that. So I'm hoping that with the kind of use of military instruments that India has been doing in the last 5-7 years, it would be possible to change Pakistan's behavior over a period of time. It has to be a long haul. It cannot be a one action exercise. One surgical strike or one airstrike will not change their behavior. But over a period of time, as you keep chipping away at the credibility of their armed forces, it will slowly change their behavior along with your actions on the other spectrum, the other parts of the dime that I mentioned to you.
Very interesting. I must say that's a very different and a fresh way of looking at it, and appreciate that, ma'am. Ma'am, Chinese have also built up a reactor in Pakistan. One of them, I would say this is the first technology that they're exporting, which is Chinese. If I read correctly, it's about 1100 megawatts. And the world is concerned about it, but especially after the leak that was seen in China, there is a bit of eyebrows which are raising, although not many people are talking about it, because considering Pakistan's safety scenario and stuff like that, people are a bit concerned. There have been some write-ups about it, about this Chinese reactor. Well, that apart, they also, apart from the power production, which is obviously supposed to be the main purpose, if it can also be used for other enrichment and other things. How do you see something like this going forward, with Pakistan and China colluding together with regards to this nuclear domain in open? I mean, they were doing it before, but this is bang in the open now.
So, Adi, the China-Pak nuclear cooperation in the weapons field is very old. As we all know, the proliferation started sometime in the 1970s, and it's continued from then on. But the nuclear energy cooperation between China and Pakistan started in 1986 with an agreement. And the idea was to build one reactor, 300 megawatts at Chashma, which became operational in 2000. Thereafter, it's a win-win situation for Pakistan and China, because to Pakistan, nobody else is selling nuclear reactors. And China is trying to establish itself as a credible nuclear energy exporter. So it finds in Pakistan a market for its nuclear reactors where it can showcase to the rest of the world that we are able to get into nuclear energy exports. So since I would say since the 2013, when another cooperation agreement was signed between the two, the energy cooperation has really gone on very strongly between the two of them. And you mentioned this new reactor, a 1,000 megawatt reactor, the largest that Pakistan has at the moment. In fact, they have 5 other operational reactors, all of which together produce about 1,450 megawatts of electricity. And this one reactor is producing 1,000 megawatt of electricity. So it definitely gave them a jump in their nuclear energy production, going up from 5% to 9% with just one reactor coming online. Uh, and for Pakistan, nuclear energy is important because their energy production sources currently are very skewed in favor of natural gas and oil. And they want to diversify that basket and do it in a manner that would help them address also the climate change issues. So you want a low carbon source, and nuclear energy is a low carbon source. Now, like India, since Pakistan is not a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, it is not possible for them to get nuclear energy cooperation from other countries unless they were to get an exceptionalization from the Nuclear Suppliers Group, which is a small group of about 65 countries, which are nuclear exporters. And they decide on some guidelines that if you are not an NPT member, you would not get that cooperation. You would not get exports of nuclear energy, material, technology, equipment, all of that. Now, India, because of its responsible nuclear behavior, got itself exceptionalized in 2008 from the NSG, and therefore we are now party to international nuclear commerce, but Pakistan is not. So China is the only country that is giving them nuclear reactors, and that's why this relationship is so important for Pakistan. Now, the concern comes from the fact that China is doing all of this provision of nuclear energy cooperation to Pakistan outside the NSG ambit. Because as a member of the NSG, China should not be providing this to Pakistan. But as part of their old agreements, they say that we are grandfathering the new reactors, even though when NSG, when China became party to the NSG, it had never mentioned that it had plans for future nuclear reactor exports to Pakistan. And that's where the problem comes in. Also, majority of these reactors which are coming in and which they have plans for in the future, while they are under the IAEA safeguards, so the chances of any clandestine activity happening is low. But in the garb of providing this kind of a technology and material to Pakistan, what else is China providing? That we don't know. And that's where the concern comes in. So as far as nuclear energy cooperation is concerned, Pakistan has a right to have nuclear reactors, but it should be within the international nuclear order that has been created. And the NSG does not allow it to have it, but China, in violation of NSG, is providing it the reactors. And the concern then is that one, you are breaching the norm of non-proliferation, which was created at the international level. And two, this irresponsible behavior can be replicated by others as well. And then you would not be able to do anything about it. So that's where the problem comes in.
Interesting. Ma'am, whatever said and done, the Chinese do all this stuff, but at the end of it, their bandwagoning about the nuclear threat is very low. Even from their mouthpieces, even from the PLA mouthpieces, you don't hear that N word too often, until and unless they want to project something or showcase their weapons or showcase their missiles and stuff like that. That is where they stop to. Pakistan, on the other hand, has been involved with, although they've got their own technology from China, that's an open secret. But Pakistan on its own has also been involved with various nefarious activities around the world. And the world somehow refuses to put them in that bracket of being, I'm going to use this phrase very, very loosely, but a nuclear terrorist, if I'm, maybe allowed to say that. They've been giving this technology to rogue nations. As a matter of fact, there is evidence of Pakistani sending missiles in their Air Force aircraft to the North Koreans when the then Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto had gone for a visit to Beijing. There has been evidence of Pakistani sharing a lot of information with the Iranians. There is evidence of them sharing information with Libya, with Iraq, and so on and so forth. I mean, the list is kind of endless. Uh, my question is, why, one, does the world not recognize this particular threat? And two, if they've done it before, what stops them from doing it again?
So it's not that the world does not recognize Pakistan as a proliferator. I think that realization, that understanding, that acceptance is very much there
Mm.
today.
Okay.
That there was a proliferation network that was run from Pakistan. There is enough, in fact, literature also now available through archival research, which is showing how the US and Europe were keeping their eyes closed to what was going on because of the requirement of Pakistan for them, for their foreign policy at that moment in time. The thing is that Pakistan has not been publicly chastised. So while privately everybody sort of admits that Pakistan is a proliferator, that their irresponsible behavior has happened, but you don't see any uh, punishment being meted out to that country for those irresponsible activities. And this, I think, is essentially because of the strategic importance of this country in a geography which is of great concern to the US. So while during the Cold War, the concern was spread of communism from Soviet Union into the region. And then when the invasion of Afghanistan happened in 1979 by USSR, Pakistan became very important for the US in order to stop that invasion from spreading any further to defeat the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. So that was important. Again, Pakistan leveraged that position for getting a lot of benefits for itself in terms of continuing with the nuclear program, not just for itself, but as you pointed out, by providing material to others as well. So the centrifuges that are found in Iran, which became the source of suspicion of their nuclear weapons ambitions, were from Pakistan. So a lot of this activity that was going on, um, the superpowers, despite knowing about it, had to keep their eyes closed to it. And the whole, understanding with Pakistan was don't go beyond a point in terms of testing your own nuclear weapons, but you can sort of, the other uh, activities which are going on, we can let it pass because of the need that was felt for Pakistan and its particular location in the region. Uh, Later on, with the war on terror, again Pakistan became extremely important, and that has continued 20 years down the line, where the country continues to be so important for dealing with the situation in Afghanistan. Even though all of us know that Pakistan is also the creator of the problem in Afghanistan. So despite all of this, uh, since national interest takes priority for big countries, major countries, it does for everyone, but it matters when big powers behave in a certain manner. And that is what has happened in the case of this, that Pakistan, despite everybody understanding what was going on from there, uh, Pakistan managed to put AQ Khan as the front face or the only actor in the whole thing, and the state was able to deny its own role in the whole process. But as I pointed out, enough archival research material is today available to establish the culpability of Pakistani state, which is privately admitted by nearly all nations in conversations that you have with them, but publicly they still don't call out that irresponsible behavior and hold up Pakistan to a certain standard on this particular issue.
Interesting. And firstly, ma'am, thank you so much for rephrasing that question. I think it made more sense when you said it. I'd like to ask you and keep a moment, and this is probably my last question on Pakistan. There has been studies done by the United States about the security of the Pakistani nuclear weapons. There are multiple stories which are in the market, and one of the weirdest ones that I heard was they keep their nuclear weapons on road, especially the feasible material. They actually keep it on road through the time just to make sure that nobody gets their hands on it. And there are multiple such theories which are around the place. Uh, in a very broad context, do you, as a expert in nuclear security, fear the safety of these weapons?
Well, Adi, safety of weapons is always a concern wherever they are. So it's not just in Pakistan, but nuclear weapons are today with 9 nuclear armed states.
Yeah.
And the safety of the weapon is a concern. We've also seen cases of safety issues coming up in the US or in other places which are supposed to have extremely safe systems. And I want to make a distinction between safety and security. When we talk about the security of nuclear weapons, we are looking at the physical as well as the material security of the weapon and of the material.
Okay.
Now, what is a matter of concern in the case of Pakistan is not so much the safety of the weapons, which I'm sure the army, which is in control of the weapon systems, must be taking good care of, because these are their crown jewels and they can't afford to have something go wrong with that. So countries over a period of time, in terms of the safety of their command and control systems, safety of the weapon systems, by creating permissive action links, which are sort of electronic codes to make sure that nothing goes wrong with the weapon. Countries do develop that technology and they make sure that safety aspects are not compromised. What is of concern in Pakistan is the security of the weapons, because it's a country which has one, it has proliferated in the past. So there is always this chance of insider threats, or somebody who has been part of the proliferation network in the past, and old habits make you do something which could be different. And the other, of course, is the security of the nuclear material, possibility of pilferage, threats of some kind of theft of that, sabotage of nuclear power plants. So these are some of the concerns of security. And for a country which, as I said, has seen proliferation in the past or been an actor in the proliferation exercise, and for a country which has uh, a large number of terrorist organizations, the security aspect becomes a problem, because these are terrorist organizations that we have seen who don't think of only the US or India as their enemy. Sometimes they think of the establishment within Pakistan as their enemy, and they would want to, create some problem there. So the security dimension is a concern, which Pakistan also has claimed for some years now that they are extremely conscious about, and that they have invested a lot of money and effort to make sure that there are no security breaches. So, as part of, if you remember, in 2010, President Obama had first brought attention to the idea of nuclear terrorism. And he had held a series of summits where presidents, the heads of government, went in order to make the commitment for their nation that they would take charge of their nuclear security. So, nuclear security became a national responsibility, and it had to be held up to certain international benchmarks. So, international conventions, best practices, etc., were put out, and every nation was committed to making sure that they would live up to those commitments. So as a part of that, Pakistan also did a lot of activity in order to make sure that security was well taken care of. So I again, the answer is that security is a matter of concern given the background in which Pakistan has grown up, with its proliferation and its terrorist sponsorship activity. But nevertheless, one would expect that with international attention on the country, of the level that we have seen in the last decade or so, where they are very conscious of the security of their nuclear weapons, they must be making sure that nothing goes amiss, because that would go very badly against Pakistan, and they would not want that slur on their reputation once again after having borne the brunt of nuclear proliferation. Uh, so there is a concern. One can never say never in this business, but nevertheless, I think I won't lose sleep over the security dimension, because Pakistan is extremely conscious of that and how the world is looking at it from the security dimension.
I hope so, ma'am. And if there is one thing that Pakistan should do right, I think this is one thing they need to do right.
They
Let them
have
not.
to.
Yeah, they have to,
Absolutely.
because
So sometimes the stories that you mentioned about things lying on road, etc., could be exaggerated in order to paint it in a certain manner. I think we need to take a more nuanced position. I
Yeah,
mean, nuclear material is not something that can go missing so easily, because countries do keep material accounting and take that very seriously. And I would expect that Pakistan would be doing the same. Uh,
I hope
I
so.
think they've burnt their fingers. Yeah, they've burnt their fingers once with the proliferation exercise that they did, and wanting to get back uh, the title of a responsible nuclear weapon state. They want to exhibit a certain kind of behavior in today's times, and they seem to be doing it. And we should actually be helping them along by giving them those positive strokes if they are doing things right.
Interesting. And one thing I take from your answer is that Pakistan in that time when they were doing this proliferation with many a country, at that time they were in a much stronger economic place. They were in a much stronger political place in around the world. Uh, they were, I mean, listened to by at least some part of the world. Today, it's not the case. So I guess it's more important for them to kind of keep their act together with regards to this whole thing. Ma'am, coming back to India, when you look at Pakistan, the next door neighbor, India has been responsible in terms of nuclear issues. We've developed our own technology, we've developed our own systems, we've done pretty much everything self standing. It's taken us a while, but we are one of the few countries in the world, in spite of having no setup or anything like that, we pretty much started up. We did what we had to do. We've got our own weapons, we've got our own deterrence system, we've got the nuclear triad. Apart from that, we are actually eagerly, complying to all the norms and regulations which are there by any international body governing nuclear issues. But NSG still remains a pipe dream. Is it just politics or is there anything else?
So the NSG membership is proving to be a difficult thing for India, largely because of the politics. In fact, if you see the exceptionalization that India managed to get in 2008, once the Indo US nuclear deal was signed, the next step then was to get this body of NSG to exceptionalize India so that nuclear trade would be possible with India. And we got that in 2008.
Hmm.
Since then, now India has been wanting to become a member of the NSG,
Yeah.
to become party to that. And why that is important for India is because there are several people who say that, and there is a sense that now that we've been exceptionalized and we are part of the nuclear order, we don't have to worry about the NSG membership, because we are getting our nuclear material in terms of uranium for our nuclear power plants. We are getting our nuclear technology. We have memorandums of understanding with so many countries. We can get, import of nuclear reactors, which we have already signed up with France, with US, even with South Korea. So all of this is now possible for India. So why is the NSG membership important then? I would say the NSG membership is important because NSG is a rule-making body on nuclear commerce. And for a country like India, which is investing so much in its nuclear power program and wants to have rapid expansion of its nuclear power because of our energy requirements and the need to fulfill those energy requirements in a environmentally sustainable manner, because you are committing to certain greenhouse gas emission cuts as part of the Paris Agreement. So while your electricity has to grow quickly, it must grow environmentally sustainably. And therefore, nuclear energy is important for India. So now, when you're investing so much in the nuclear energy program, you don't want it to happen that tomorrow the NSG changes the guidelines or changes its rules in such a manner that you are cut out of the picture once again. So, for that reason, it becomes important for you also to be part of the rule making body so that you are not undercut in any form after the kind of investment that we've made into this business. So, that's the reason India is interested in being a part of the NSG. Apart from that, I don't think we need to be very worried about the fact that we are not members of the NSG or that politics is getting in the way. That's a part of the geopolitical situation where China has put a spanner in the wheels for India, because they've taken a very legalistic position to say that India is not a member of the
NPT.
NPT. and therefore you cannot become a member of the NSG. But actually, if you look at the guidelines of the NSG on their own website, uh, NPT membership is not uh, the important criteria. It's that you are behaving within the spirit of the NPT is what those guidelines tell you. The criteria for membership of the NSG, and India is very much doing that. In fact, more than some of the nuclear weapon states themselves. So it's just the politics which has gotten in the way, and today's China, which is far more uh, aggressive and far more assertive in its behavior, is not allowing India into the NSG. So we'll just have to wait our time for the politics to get right at some moment to get into the NSG. But till we don't get in there, I don't think there's any major problem that's holding us.
Okay.
So as long as we keep our political equations and relationships with the rest of the NSG members right, I don't think we need to worry so much about not being there for the time being.
Ma'am, we were talking about terrorism and uh, the nuclear part of it. We recently saw in the news that there were attempts and one successfully conducted thievery or theft of, I mean, it's not very clear it was
Uranium.
radioactive or not, uranium. And that kind of puts a little bit of a, it, for the lack of a better phrase, raises the hair in the back of your neck, because it's not something that you read or you hear about very, very often. I'm very, very thankful to the security agencies who've been tracking all this stuff and responsibly got everything done. There was another news that came out, but that thing was not very, very true. But this one catch of uranium was something to be concerned about. What is your thoughts on this?
So this news that appeared on the theft of uranium, I think it draws attention to two things. One is to the continuing seriousness of the threat of nuclear terrorism. That non-state actors, or perhaps even state actors, which are using the non-state actors as proxies, are desirous of acquiring nuclear material in order to, at some point, carry out an act of nuclear terrorism. And this has been a concern, as I pointed out to you, for a long period of time. But President Obama shone the spotlight on the threat of nuclear terrorism. So, when you hear a news like this, uh, it should make us realize that we should not let our eyes off the ball of nuclear security. President Obama had held these 4 summits in which the highest level of political attention was brought to the idea of nuclear security, and nations rose to the occasion of doing certain things, as I mentioned to you. But ever since the summits finished in 2016, uh, you find that the focus on nuclear security has dissipated a little bit. It's not been so much in the news. You don't have so many seminars or articles coming out which are drawing your attention to that. So when some incident like this takes place, it again brings your attention back to the issue of nuclear security, uh, and also to the fact that such kind of trafficking does take place. The International Atomic Energy Agency maintains a database on nuclear trafficking, nuclear material trafficking, and they've been able to detect such cases going up. So there is a trend upwards. Of course, there are very small quantities of the material that are caught in these exercises, but it gives you the picture that people of some kind, of some motivation, are behind trying to get such nuclear material to lay their hands on it for any kind of a malicious or a malified activity in the future. So you have to be focused. The other thing it draws your attention to is the fact that nuclear security measures are working, that you have been able to catch something which was being pilfered. So it's this provides a positive reinforcement then to the efforts which are being made at national level as well as the international level. So I would say that this draws your attention to it from both sides, from the negative as well as the positive dimension. And what it becomes important is that don't lose focus of the possibility of nuclear terrorism. It has not happened until now. Uh, Hopefully, it will not. But nevertheless, that is possible only when we make sure that all of the security measures that have to be put in place by different states, because the terrorist has to be lucky only once.
Once.
You have to be lucky every time to be able to make sure that such an incident does not take place. So all these stakeholders that have to be involved in nuclear security, right from the border guard, customs to state policing to every other department that has to be part of this, must always be alive to the threat of nuclear terrorism and keep their focus on that particular dimension.
It's a very scary proposition, I must say, because it doesn't take much to create a psychological effect of, you know, just exploding a small little thing and saying uranium, because it's more of a psychological thing than a physical damage that will happen to any public center or city, or for that matter, any state. Ma'am,
Yeah, you're right. And
yeah,
no, I just want to say that it's for that reason that this is called a weapon of mass disruption, not destruction, because it will cause a huge amount of disruption uh, in terms of people getting very scared about the radiological effects of what such kind of an act has happened, even though the actual radiation into the environment might not happen or be very little. But the scare will get people to run away, evacuate. We'll have cases of road rage, traffic jams, and disruption.
a whole
So
lot of
that's what is, yeah, that's the scary part of
a whole
nuclear
series of
terrorism.
events. As a matter of fact, people have seen the effects: Chernobyl, Fukushima, leaving alone Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We've also seen the mistaken dropping of the United States bomb that hit. I think in the 1960s, when they tested a bomb, and it was beyond their own expectations. It went across and hit certain Japanese islands, and stuff like that. So we've seen the effects of something like this, and I'm sure people are quite scared. Ma'am, lastly, I'd like to actually, take your security. I'd like you to put your security cap on and think about this factor that we are talking about nuclear threats and we are talking about nuclear attacks and stuff like that. There is obviously, and I'm sure, I don't know if you agree or not agree, but there is a murmur in the world today about this Wuhan virus being a biological weapon. The way it has been put across, or it may not have been a biological weapon, but it certainly has been used like that. So the possibility of these kind of events, once it is there and people are kind of discussing about it pretty freely today, it wasn't so last year, the possibility is pretty high. Now, having brought this biological weapons into the picture, how do you think nuclear deterrence is going to play a role? Because I heard some people saying that this is the next generation of nuclear weapons, which is going to literally disrupt an entire society. So how do you think nuclear weapons in the future as well as biological weapons are going to balance each other out?
See, in terms of nuclear deterrence, I don't find a role for nuclear weapons to deter the possibility of biological or chemical weapons. So biological warfare, has been constrained by the international community through a biological and toxin weapons convention
Yeah.
that does not allow states to do bioweapons. And countries, that we are talking about, all the major responsible countries are members of the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention. Similarly, there is a Chemical Weapons Convention, which also bans the use of chemical weapons. And this has been in existence since 1983. Unlike the Biological Weapons Convention, the Chemical Weapons Convention is also a verifiable convention. So if you suspect somebody of having chemical weapons or wanting to use them or keeping a stockpile, you can actually carry out verification of those states to make sure that no such activity is taking place. Now, international conventions have banned the possibility of conventional and bio. However, some doctrines, nuclear doctrines, including that of India, maintain that you would be able to do nuclear retaliation against chemical and biological weapons. So you have, as part of your doctrine, nuclear deterrence against use of chemical and biological. But the problem is chemical or biological usage of weapons, if it was to happen by the non-state actor, who will you hit with nuclear weapons?
It's not that
Because where would you hit? A non-state actor doesn't have anything of value uh, that you can hit out at in order to deter him from using it. And if it was a state exercise, then you have to first be able to attribute that it has happened from that particular state. Now, in the case that you mentioned of the Wuhan virus, and everybody has been talking about that it was a leak, deliberate, not deliberate, we haven't been able to establish anything. And attribution has been so difficult. So while the whole world is suspecting a particular thing from a particular country, can you use nuclear weapons against them against a situation like this? So my sense of the whole concept of nuclear deterrence is nuclear weapons are essentially only credible when you have to stop the use of nuclear weapons of the other side. Against chemical, biological, cyber, space warfare, the use of your nuclear weapons is not going to bring you into a position which is better than what you were earlier.
Mm.
So you have to deal with the kind of challenges that we have of possibilities of biological or chemical by strengthening the conventions that we have, by having the countries live up to the commitments that they've made as part of that convention, and do that successively. Otherwise, by suggesting that I will use my nuclear weapons against your use of biological, I don't think we are going to gain anything, because the other side, if he has biological and nuclear, you are only going to bring back nuclear retaliation on yourself.
Mm.
So strengthen the conventions, make sure that countries live up to the responsible behavior which is necessary as civilized community, because uh, this is exposing your mutual vulnerability. Wherever the virus originated from, that country has also not been unaffected by the virus. So normally the reason people gave up biological and chemical weapons warfare was because it's not something that can be done only to the other without affecting you in the process. And nuclear deterrence works on the same principle, that if you use radioactivity against me, you will also suffer as a result of that. And that mutual vulnerability is what keeps deterrence at play. So, I mean, I understand there's a lot of literature which is appearing about unrestricted warfare and how, the whole world will go crazy. Now, every warfare has to have a political objective. And you have to find an answer to that political problem which is causing you to get into that field of unrestricted warfare. So I think the solution lies more at the political level in terms of conversations, dialogues, improvement in relationships, rather than getting trapped into this thinking about one action from the other side is going to beget another wrong action from the other side, and you go down that spiral of one for the other. So we have to look at the big picture and find answers from that bigger dimension, rather than just get into an offense defense spiral on any of these technologies. And that's my sense of the situation.
Interesting. I think I take your point that attribution of a biological weapon would be very, very difficult to do. And no matter, you know, it is also a genie in a bottle. I mean, let's take it for an instance that the Chinese actually did what they did, where the genie is coming back and hitting at them because they're shutting down their country for the next 1 year, in spite of having, most of the population vaccinated. So it's a genie in a bottle, and I agree with you on that. But having said that, there is also a thin line which is, blurring out, if I may put it that way, with regards to um, the unrestricted warfare, as you mentioned. That line which was there, which was pretty evident between low intensity combat to unrestricted to actual war fighting. This whole concept of unrestricted warfare that the Chinese have come up with is creating quite a ripple around the world, and that is one of the reasons why I think a lot of people do suspect the Chinese of being complacent with the spread. Uh, I am not sure with the evidence which is available. It does look like that, but one will have to obviously wait and see as to how this whole game comes forward. Ma'am, this has been an amazing conversation. I'd like to, express my gratitude for you to, take out this time to talk to me. We've gone through various different issues, starting from, what nuclear deterrence is all about. We've spoken about the Chinese. We've spoken about the collusion between the Pakistanis and the Chinese. We've spoken about the security threats that emerge out of Pakistan as a, I wouldn't call it as a nuclear terrorist, but as a non-responsible nuclear state who has been involved with a lot of um, different activities, which resulted in a lot of damage to the geopolitical environment and the peace and stability of many regions. As a matter of fact, North Korea is what it is because of a lot of help that had gone from Pakistanis. And it is very important for us to understand the kind of security scenario that we are sitting in the middle of. As ma'am had very clearly said, we are the only country in the world with two nuclear armed foes sitting on our shoulder. And if you look back at history, both of them have been very irresponsible. So it is very important for us as citizens to understand what this whole nuclear game is all about. If if we need to have proper strength and proper sense of responsibility within this country to protect ourselves. Thank you so much, ma'am. This has been an eye opener, and I'd obviously try and trouble you to come on to my show once again for another topic another day.
Thank you very much, Adi. It was a pleasure.